Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. My guest today is Ibrahim Kalin. He's a senior advisor and spokesperson for Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on.
I want to begin with an incident that took place last week. Turkey withdrew 40 soldiers participating in a NATO drill in Norway, during which Turkey's founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and its president, Mr. Erdogan, were reportedly depicted as enemies. Both NATO Secretary General Norway's have apologized, but Mr. Erdogan has refused the apologies and said, "This is not against me, this is against Turkey." What does it say about your relationship with NATO?
But I think we have a good relationship with NATO in the first place.
Not so good anymore.
No, I mean, this is one incident, but of course we are a strong ally, in NATO, and we've participated in many exercises. In fact, we've been part of NATO for more than 50 years now. Of course, this incident has to be studied, investigated very carefully. Who did it, and who put these pictures in there, etc. We have received apology, which is fine. But
you don't accept it.
One has to explain how within a system like NATO, a military alliance, such strict disciplined system, such a thing can happen.
It's not an accident for you.
Well, I don't know the details. We'll see. I mean, we rely on NATO's explanation so far, and I think there will be an investigation. I think a couple of people have already been fired. That's good, but we have to see, how can such a thing be allowed within the NATO system so that these things do not happen again? But obviously, it is completely unacceptable, to do that for any country, especially for our founding president, Atatürk, and for our current president, to do that, and then expect Turkey not to react to it. That's not possible.
But Turkey is not considering severing ties with NATO. You're still a firm and clear member.
Of course, we are. We're an important ally in NATO.
I want to get to the relationship with the U.S. Obviously, there are some tensions. First of all, over your repeated request that they extradite the cleric Fetullah Gulen, whom you consider to be behind the coup attempt. And there's also a tension about the prosecution in the U.S. of a man called Reza Zarrab. He's a dual Turkish-Iranian national accused of busting U.S. sanctions against Iran. U.S. prosecutors in their filings have said that there is some evidence showing that he had some ties with the Turkish leadership, including your president. Why are you so worried about this prosecution in the U.S.?
As far as our relationship with the U.S. is concerned, we have a long-standing strategic alliance with the United States. But right now, over the last couple of years, going back to Obama administration time, we have two main issues. One is U.S. support for PYD-YPG in Syria in the name of fighting Daesh. Number two is the Gulenist network in the U.S., where the Gulenists have taken place and used the system to their advantage through charter schools, visa fraud, money laundering, and many other things. Now they are using the U.S. system to launch attacks against Turkey. And the Reza Zarrab case, or the case for Halkbank, which is one of the public banks in Turkey, is part of this. Now, we have never asked for anything that is outside the legal framework. We have asked for his extradition to Turkey based on the treaty of extradition of criminals that we signed with the United States in the 1960s. So, and there are arrest warrants for many of these Gulenist operatives who live in the U.S. at the moment. So we are asking for their extradition so that they can be tried in Turkey.
But this is not happening. The U.S. is not going to extradite Fetullah Gulen.
It's not happening, but they're not giving us any convincing explanation.
Have you lost hope?
Why? Well, we keep working on it.
But they are not listening.
But apparently, it is having a negative impact on the bilateral relationship, because if you allow such a group of people, function in your country against another key ally, how are we supposed to respond to that?
And the Zarrab case is very embarrassing for your president, it seems. He's made repeated calls for the U.S. to drop it. The U.S. says no. If there is evidence tying Mr. Erdogan to this person who was busting sanctions.
There is no tie. It's all I think they are just trying to put this to create some kind of a reputational damage for the president.
Is this a political case?
It is a political case.
By the U.S. prosecutors?
Absolutely. It's a political case.
That's a very serious accusation. You're saying the U.S. is using its justice system to target your president?
We have said it all along. This whole thing is a very politically motivated case. We are dependent on energy from outside. We had to do this trade with Iran. done. During the sanctions, we said we will have to try some other means to do it. Our banks were involved. Our economy ministry was involved. Americans know this all. Now, 3-4 years later, we end up with this court case, which was brought up for in the first place by Gulenists in Turkey, and they were dismissed in Turkey. Now they picked up the same exact indictment, and now they're doing the same trial in the U.S.
But who is they? I mean, is it the Trump administration?
It's not the Trump administration.
So who
it's
is
certain
they?
people within the system, within the judiciary, which the Gulenists apparently have made contacts with.
You think the Gulenists are controlling the U.S. justice system?
That's what you are saying. What
No,
I'm
but
saying
that's
is
what
that
you're implying.
it's being made political, and if you look at what the goal, what the implications are, what they're trying to do with this court case is apparently what they tried to do in Turkey before, and they failed.
And he seems to be cooperating with U.S. authorities. Is that why you're so worried, Mr. Zarrab?
I don't know the court details, so it's a judicial process. Again, I want to repeat that we have never asked for anything outside the legal framework. But unfortunately, both the Obama administration and the Trump administration have failed to deliver on this key issue. And it is having an impact on the relationship between two key allies.
I want to get to the other point that you mentioned. Obviously, major disagreement in Syria. The U.S. is supporting, including militarily, the Syrian Kurdish group known as the PYD. YPG, which is considered by Turkey as the offshoot of the PKK. And we've seen that group take control of the capital of the Islamic State in Syria, Raqqa, and we've learned that actually there was a deal between the Islamic State group in that city and this group whereby many jihadists were allowed to leave with the agreement of the Western coalition. What's your reaction to that deal?
First of all, it's a terrible deal. When we found out about it, of course,
it saved life, maybe, of civilians.
Reacted to it. But I think it shows the fallacy of supporting one terrorist group, which is PYD-YPG, against another terrorist group, which is Daesh. We have said this all along, that you cannot fight one terrorist organization against another one.
But do you think they're not terrorists?
Well,
it seems. I mean, if not, they wouldn't give them weapons.
As I said, until very recently, in their official documents, PYD-YPG was always listed as PKK Syria branch. Is PKK a terrorist organization? Yes, it is, right? So their Syria branch is also, and that's where they get their commands. In fact, if you look at the command structure of the PYD-YPG, they get all their key orders from the Candle Mountain and the PKK operatives. Now, the question is this. They've said all along that PYD-YPG is the most effective force against Daesh. Well, it's actually the other way around. Whoever the U.S. has provided that kind of support to another group, for example, to Free Syrian Army or Turkmen or other Arab groups, they will have been the most effective force against Daesh. They provided that military...
A deliberate choice.
Yeah, huge military support.
They're saying that they're the best fighters.
Why? Because they have the American backing.
So what's the goal of the U.S.? I mean, what's the goal there? I mean, do you think they want to stay in that area? Because they told you, as far as I understand, that this deal was temporary. We need to retake Raqqa, Manbij, Deir el-Zor, all the cities control in that area. Do you think this was a lie?
Well, first of all, we have supported and we have been part of the fight against Daesh. We have done our own operation, Euphrates Shield operation. We have cleared 2,000-kilometer area from Daesh terrorists. We have eliminated thousands of them. We supported the Daesh operations in Mosul and in other places. Our main concern is to do this with the wrong people. In Iraq, for example, we have trained Iraqi soldiers in Bashika camp, the Mosul volunteers, etc. We have helped the Peshmerga and the Iraqi army in the fight against Daesh. We have no problem with that. So it's a question of who you do it with. And our main opposition there, in regards to the PYD-YPG, they are PKK Syria branch, and you cannot legitimize
what's the goal
the PKK
of the US?
In the name of fighting Daesh.
But what's the goal of the U.S.? To stay, to have a permanent
They told us all
region?
along. They told us all along that their relationship with PYD-YPG is transactional and temporary, which means that once Raqqa is liberated, Daesh is eliminated, they will start disengaging. So we are now expecting the U.S. to disengage from PYD-YPG because the mission has been accomplished.
And
we will see.
And?
We will see how they will devise their plans now.
What are their plans? Do you think U.S. president wants a permanent presence?
There seems to be some consideration to stay there longer because now that the Raqqa areas, etc., have been cleared.
Why?
And the thinking probably is that they want to be there against the Russian-Iranian presence in Syria. Now, if that's the goal, that's the idea, that will complicate things even further on the ground. Why? Because one of the key elements as we go forward to the, for example, trilateral Sochi summit, the Geneva, Astana processes, one of the key principles that we have to keep in mind is to keep Syria together. That is Syria's territorial integrity. If you have so many different groups, whether they are non-state actors or states, etc., vying for territorial dominance, etc., that goal will be impossible to achieve.
Just last question. There will be a top-level meeting this week between your president, President Vladimir Putin, President Hassan Rouhani, to try to maybe push ahead for a political solution in Syria. They obviously saved Bashar al-Assad. You want him gone. How can you agree on a political solution?
Well, first of all, let me state for your viewers also that we see Astana process complementing rather than replacing the Geneva process. Now they're working in two different tracks. One is under the UN, one is under the three countries that you mentioned. Assad is not the person to unite Syria. He's lost that legitimacy. He's not the person to lead Syria to an inclusive, democratic, multicultural, a functional and legitimate governance structure. Obviously, it's up to the Syrian people at the end of the day.
Or to the Russians or the Iranians?
Well, the Russians and the Iranians, of course, supported
How can you agree on this?
Of course, we do not agree on this particular issue.
It's a key issue.
We will continue to discuss, obviously, and our position has been clear. And we believe that for the Iranians and the Russians, keeping Assad in power any further is not the way or the only way or even the best way to protect their interests in Syria.
Okay. And you think you can convince them?
We keep working on it.
Ibrahim Kalin, thank you very much. That's all we have time for. Thank you for watching this edition of The Interview here on France 24.